Hello, thank you for tuning in. I am at the Blue Sky Sanctuary, which is my property in the Baja in Mexico. And today I'm excited to share with you the purchasing process that I went through to get this property. I made a 2-minute video a number of months ago that shows in picture form the story and the journey that I went through to purchase this property. And I'm grateful to say that a few people then asked me to tell the story in more detail. And so that's what I'm going to do. Here's the 2-minute video. You can fast forward the next 2 minutes if you've already seen it. Otherwise, watch the story and enjoy. And I'll give you the details and some things that you can learn vicariously through me if you'd like to purchase property here so you don't make the same mistakes that I did. And so, a quick little background as the video showed. Long story short, I sold my home in Canada. Basically, I felt really trapped by the mortgage, and I was really put off by the amount of interest that I was paying on the mortgage. It worked out to about $1,400 a month on interest, and then only about $200 a month was paying off the principal. And at that rate, I wasn't going to have the house paid off anytime soon. And in the meantime, the bills were really adding up. My water heater and furnace broke both in the first year of owning that house. So I had $10,000 in bills just for those two items alone. And I just kind of felt suffocated and trapped by the mortgage. So I chose to sell it and purchase property here in Mexico. That had always been in the back of my mind, that I would purchase property in another country that I would ultimately kind of retire to or semi-retire to or snowbird to. But basically, my dream just got pushed quickly towards me when I made that decision to let my house go. And so I came down here, I rent an apartment, and I hit the ground running looking for property. I had a real estate agent, but here's kind of like tip number one you can take if you are in the same boat I am, which I was I was trying to buy property for $20,000 or under. And they exist here, but there's not many. And real estate agents don't want to spend a whole lot of time with a client who's going to spend 20 grand. So we saw a number of properties. I made an offer on one, and it was listed for $20,000. I offered $17,375. The other agent came back and said, unless you're offering full asking, don't waste our time. And I thought that was a bit pushy, so I just stepped back from that property, and thank God I did, because it's really not where I should be. Second property fell through as well. I don't want to paint Mexico with any kind of ugly brush, but the bottom line on that property was that the person selling it didn't want to sell to a foreigner. So who knew that you could encounter that in any situation? But I did. So that passed me on the second property. And then the real estate agent and I sort of grew apart because we ran out of properties to look at together. And I kind of decided to go my own way. I would I don't want to say I want to recommend or not recommend having a real estate agent. If you find one that you are comfortable with, who's willing to work with you, even in a really tiny budget, awesome. You can use them. But there's a good chance that they're only going to be able to show you a very few properties, and they're going to be at the high end of your budget. Where the next step that I took was connecting with a local gentleman who knew everyone in the community, and as it turns out, everyone knows everyone here, and everyone knows someone who wants to sell their property. And so him and I started looking at properties. I made another offer through him. It was on a subdivided property, and here's kind of tip number 2 that you can take learning vicariously through my mistakes. Is it was a subdivided property, and I thought that I was going to be buying the piece of the property that was closer to the ocean. And so if you can imagine, the property is like this, and you think you're going to be sitting here looking at the ocean, but the reality was I was going to be sitting here. And what that means is someone is going to eventually build right in front of me, very, very close. And thank goodness I had an excellent lawyer, which is tip number 3. I'll get more into that in a moment, but he looked into the details of everything for me and stopped me from making that dire mistake. So tip number 3, I would say definitely find a lawyer that you trust. And unless you're very bilingual, you need your lawyer to be bilingual, because even if you speak decent Spanish, when it comes to legal matters, you want to make sure that you understand everything. And so I had an excellent lawyer that I would recommend to anyone in this area. And he really looked out for me, and he brought to mind and to my attention concepts that I wouldn't even have thought of myself, like, okay, you want to buy this property, it's owned by this person. Is that person married? Because maybe their spouse, or maybe they're divorced and their spouse is going to come back and try to take claim to the property. Do they have kids? Maybe their kids are going to come back and try to take claim to the property. That's something that happens here sometimes. And so your lawyer is going to make sure that not only is the title free and clean and clear, but if they're good at their job, they're going to look at all these little angles that maybe you wouldn't think of, and that don't maybe arise in the States or Canada. Maybe they do. I'm not sure. I haven't come across them anyway. And so I would highly recommend having a lawyer. If you have a real estate agent, they should have a team that does that research work on their behalf and on your behalf, but you'll want to look into that and make sure that someone is looking under every rock and making sure that everything is good to go for you. So I didn't buy that property. Those were my 3 failed offers. That took just over a year. It was between a year and a half. I kind of gave up. I parted ways with the gentleman who was showing me a bunch of locally owned properties, because also he showed me a number that were not correctly titled and the ownership wasn't quite right. So I was beginning to lose faith and hope, because I was seeing too many properties that weren't actually legitimately available, which can happen here. So I parted ways with him and continued to walk the streets and roads by myself with my dogs. And I did ultimately stumble upon the property that I sit on now, which was for sale by owner. And you probably know from your home country, there is sometimes a really good deal to be had on a property that is for sale by owner. You save money because no one is paying a real estate agent, and sometimes they're just willing to make a good deal. As it were, I didn't have to even negotiate, because the price that they were asking, I was so happy with. I was able to offer them full asking. And they are a local couple and they had a number of properties and they were just selling off one of them and it worked out fantastic. My lawyer represented me. We all sat down, old school, like in the office, shook hands. I did my best to speak Spanish and get along with the owners, and it all went fantastic. What I'd like to say is if you want to get into the real estate market down here, you can do that. Like I said, there are properties for under $20,000, and you can then chip away at that property over the years, which is exactly what I've done. So I bought this property. There was nothing on it except for a pile of rocks. And over the last it's getting on 4 years now, I've had a septic system put in. We put a fence up. We connected to the local power, the electricity, and to the water, to the city water. And I you can just purchase your property and each year come back and do something like that. That might cost $2,000 or $3,000. And in time, either sit on your property as I am right now in a trailer while you build your place, or slowly build your place. Come down and just get the foundation poured. The next year, you put up some walls. These are things that no one is going to go anywhere with. You don't need to worry about the security of your property. No one's going to take your foundation or steal your fence or your septic system. None of that can be stolen. I should say my power lines were stolen. So maybe that's one of the last things you want to put in, and you can save that until you know that you're going to be here for a little bit. I would, if you're already thinking about it, I would recommend that you take the plunge and be in for the adventure and buy your little piece of property. And if not in Mexico, wherever it is that you have been, that you felt really at home in, whether it's Costa Rica, Nicaragua was my first love. That's where I thought I was going to purchase. I ended up here in Mexico foremost because it's in driving distance from Canada, and I ended up driving my car down, as you saw in the video, filled to the brim with all my stuff, and I'm so grateful that I did that. I love having my cooking stuff here, my sewing machine, just my yoga mats, and to fly all that stuff down or to drive down to Costa Rica or Nicaragua, that's a long ways. And so here I feel like I'm close enough to Canada that in a state of emergency I can bump back and forth, I can drive back and forth, or it's a short flight, or it's a 4-hour flight, and it's developed enough here that I can live here really comfortably. There are the majority of the roads are bumpy and sandy, but there are also really beautiful paved highways, and there's enough infrastructure and development here that I can live comfortably. So those are some of the things you might want to consider when you're thinking about putting some roots down in a sunny, beautiful, warm country outside of your own. I would say that making that initial investment and giving yourself something to work towards for the future is inspiring and it's fun. It doesn't have to feel so scary or so overwhelming. It's a pretty small investment, relatively speaking. It's, the price of not even an expensive car, like $20,000 is not a ton of money when you consider the wages that we earn in Canada and the States. And so I think that in a nutshell is what I want to share about the purchasing process in Mexico. I know it doesn't sound too complicated, and it's not. Basically, the bottom line, make sure you have a good bilingual lawyer that you trust. Make sure that you really do your due diligence on looking around and exploring your options. And don't be afraid to purchase something that is completely undeveloped and then just chip away at it yourself over the years, especially if you've got lots of years to come. Because as I see it, you can either stay in your home country and make the money you need to come down here and buy $100,000 or $150,000 property that already has a house on it, or you can save $20,000, maybe $30,000, come down, buy a cheap property, and then have something there that you can keep going back to. And if you love camping, it's a no-brainer because you can just go to your property and camp. And that's what I've been doing essentially. And just my camping situation is upgrading bit by bit as the years go by. And so I'm living very comfortably now. I'm very happy to be here, and I bet that you would be too. So I hope this video helps you make any decisions you're trying to make as far as setting roots down in Mexico or a country like Mexico. I appreciate you watching, and I will see you again soon in the next video.